There's a little bit of coffee in the background as well. But thank you all for coming to the Abu Dhabi Art Lounge at Freeze. We're super excited to be here and to have you. My name is Sara bin Safwan. I'm a curator at Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, joined here by my wonderful colleagues as well, Reinfro, Sandini Podar, and Stephanie Rosenthal. And today we're going to be talking about representation in museum collection building and how essentially collections and museum building narratives are helping shape the narratives in our time. And looking at the opportunities and also the challenges of representation and inclusivity within museum collection building and global art perspectives today as well. So in the background, I also have some works from the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi collection. They've been seen before in previous exhibitions that we've done in Abu Dhabi, whether that was Seeing Through Light or a Creative Act. As well as some publications as well. So some might be familiar to you. And it's just a nice little peek into the collection that we've been building over the last
nearly 2 decades.
More than 10 years, which is super, super exciting and has been such a privilege as well. So I think I would like to start by framing the conversation around exploring these new narratives that we have been now seeing come more to light in different institutions around the world, and including what we're trying to build over at Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. We live in a moment of increased interest in seeing and learning about narratives that have not been sufficiently displayed or researched before in museum institutions or broader art historical context as well. I think maybe something that might be relevant to you here in London is the most recent exhibition at Nigeria, the Tate Modern Nigerian Modernisms as well, showing light into these art historical narratives around the world. So I just want to open this conversation with the wonderful curators on the panel about what the shift currently means in today's museum practice and curatorial practice as well. And how can this sort of museum display lead to more inclusive approaches to collection acquisition and display as well? Anyone can.
Well, first of all, Sarah, thank you for guiding us through this, and I just want to say that it's a huge honor to work with Sandini, who's the contract curator with the project since I think now you were there from the beginning. So when I joined 3 years ago as the director, it was just amazing to join. And Reinfro, who's the artistic director of the cultural sector as the Department of Culture and Tourism, to know that both of you have really shaped the DNA of that institution many, many years ago was fantastic. And you, Sarah, you have worked with the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi now also for very long. So when I came in, it was just this kind of joy to see this amazing collection, which has been built since the 1960s. And I think some of you might know that, that's really the focus we're having from the 60s upwards to now, and really focusing on West Asia, West Africa, and South Asia. And for someone like me coming into that was being mainly educated in the Western world was really an amazing learning curve with the team and working together on continuing that, but also really thinking about how to display a connection like this. And I think sitting here together is really shows how much we appreciate all these different perspectives. And it's like 4 of us here, but we're so many more, and it's a joy to know that we have curators from all parts of the world who bring their expertise and have learned and worked in many different parts, and I think that really makes a huge difference in how we build this collection. I think a real authentic way of thinking through different perspectives. And for someone like me who has tried that in many institutions, it's just the joy to see how that has been the root of this institution, and it has been collected like this since 20 years, so it's not a collection that's been built quickly. And you probably know and have heard the wonderful building is done by Frank Gehry, and the collection has been growing with the building. So to really think also how you connect with the building, and not just kind of after as an afterthought, is I think really creates this huge specificity of I think the way how we trade through will build this collection.
And maybe Reem or Sandini, if you'd like to speak a bit more about, the importance of showcasing these narratives in these institutions and the shift that we're currently seeing and the demand actually from audiences of wanting to see these not new narratives, but narratives that were always there and bringing them to light.
I think I want to echo what Stephanie said. It has been a great honor and privilege to work alongside all of you, and in helping shape what I think is going to be a transformative museum for a lot of reasons. And I think one very important aspect that I became aware of, even as a young curator working on this project, is that this is one of the very first museum building projects where curators and art historians were able to build a collection from scratch. This is not an inherited collection from a patron or a collector, and this is an ability for the 21st century to have its own narrative and say something about call it a rectification process or a need for a re-articulation of history and a presentation of and a larger representation of voices that have long been marginalized, especially our part of the world, the Arab world, and the South Asian hemisphere too. And I think for that museum became, I want to call it visionary in its emphasis and its way forward and the way we've all thought together and the processes that we brought to the threshold. So I think we're all in anticipation. I know the momentum is real, but I think the collection is promising to break ground and represent things that otherwise we've not seen it before. And the largesse of this museum, the ability for it to encompass and showcase these collections I think is also going to be something quite wonderful.
I mean, just to add, I'd also like to acknowledge the fact that, Reem and I are probably the most passionate people about representing West Asia, North Africa, and South Asia within the context of the Guggenheim at large. But there has been a lot of scholarship on the ground for decades, and this museum is not in isolation. It is very much a place of, and this is something that Stephanie, as the director, has been very instrumental in reminding us about, that this is a place of relation and a place of collaboration and a place of lateral thinking and a place that invites great art historians and museum directors, filmmakers, cultural theoreticians, students, artists from all around the region to come and be with us. And this is also really important when we keep the future public in mind. This collection has been built very much with audiences at their heart, whether it's the inhabitants and the local residents of Abu Dhabi, or how they intersect with Sharjah and Dubai, how you think of the Gulf in conversation with the rest of the GCC, and then the larger sort of concentric circles out of West Asia into the Arab world, into South Asia. So we really want to honor these communities and be in conversation in a place that is welcoming. And hopefully, I think the collection has that sense of ethics and ethos in mind as well.
And one thing I also want to stress, because I think it's been on my mind, is that we have worked very hard for this not to be an essentialist place, right? This is not about recycling or reconstituting hierarchies. And unfortunately, essentialism has become something that is, we don't want to replicate hierarchism in that way, or substitute one authoritarianism towards the other? What does it mean to allow for a circular history, one that is in a status of exchange and metamorphosis at all points in time, when there is no articulation of beginning or ends? And I think this is something that, we've seen. A culture is that, right? It's that mindset. But at the same time, absence has been very big. Indigenous cultures, representations of so many various histories, schools of thought. We see now the Nigerian modernism show at I know this history deeply. Many of the scholars that we deal with and curators that we work with know this history so deeply. What does it mean that we're only now in the 21st century starting to hear about embody and all the various other schools? It's just, there is a big role to play for sure. And I think there's a lot for museums to, including our own, to think and channel some of that work.
And I think it's good about what you both mentioned, that we got open in a time where shows like the Nigerian modernism are also in other institutions. So it's not that we doing something which not many other researchers have been involved with, but we are at a time where museums are taking that. And it's an institution which I think is a beautiful combination between deep research, but also a playfulness and a belief in story and individual stories and storytelling. So something which I was always desperate to see when I go to museum. But of course it is, we tell about existing histories, you add to these existing histories, but you also have the possibility to really say, how can we talk about these and acknowledge that there are individual stories in these, and how can we convey these to our visitors? And so to have a gallery which is a storytelling gallery is something which I especially enjoy, because I feel that you get a different access. And I think the way how the building is put together is really that there isn't a linear way. It's really
it's a circle.
And it's like, exactly, you can begin and end wherever you want. You can start and finish where you feel in that moment. So not this belief in the building that there is one specific beginning, and therefore there is no forcefully the right beginning. And that is something which it's embedded in the collection and how it will be displayed and how it's lived in the building. I think it's a very kind of organic way of thinking through these different histories.
Yes. I think all of you have really described how nuanced and complex, these histories are, and also how interconnected they all can be as well. And the way that we're trying to attempt to show that in a non-rigid or non-linear way is part of that work, right? Part of trying to decompress or take it away from these very rigid structures that we're so used to seeing. So how do we? What are the kind of structures that we're implementing, within museum building or a collection building that we're looking to? Is there research methods? Is there curatorial approaches that we're thinking about specifically to showcase these nuances, to really show the diversity and the breadth of what these art histories are?
I'll leave it.
And I think that one method, I think what we alluded to, is also to really believe that we do not represent other voices, but that these voices are speaking within the team. And I think that's a way which we are fortunate enough to be able to do that with the team, but also that I think the way we can work together with the colleagues in Abu Dhabi and the UAE, but also our conservation colleagues in New York, in Davao, to really kind of share and be able to be a platform to share these researches, I think is making a big difference. And I think something you think someone who have worked in New York and then you joined the Kebab Abu Dhabi. So there is a long, I think, history of really believing also in a sustainable way of thinking through, on the one hand, the DNA of the Kebab in abstraction, but also to really see that the deep expertise, which is in the region. And I think you represent that, and many of your colleagues to really see that it's a learning from each other. That's a true collaboration between a New York foundation and an Abu Dhabi government, and how that is enriching how we can work and how our methods really entwine, and how that's enriching in the way how we can build collections or display collections.
Should I say you go? It was very interesting. We both worked in New York. So Reem was the associate curator of Middle Art, and I was the associate curator of Asian art. So we've been buddies for a long time, and comrades in arms. But just to say that the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi collection has been, the research behind it, the conceptualization, the kind of conceptual and scholarly processes behind it were really laid down in 2007. So this is 18 years of thinking and rethinking, and it's not going to be finished. It's scholarship and learning and listening never have an end date. And what you'll see when the building opens is one iteration and one manifestation of what is collective thinking. And I have to also acknowledge all the different curators who worked on this project from 2008 onwards. Some of them are still with the team, others aren't. But it's a massive kind of collective brainpower that has gone into building this collection. But just to say, in terms of methodologies, that when you are, I'll just use South Asia as an example, just as a case study, you want to have depth because you want to look at artistic movements and styles, artistic circles, iconographies, aesthetics, but it's always in relation to peers and a certain kind of translationalism and a certain kind of translationalism. So it's these really important figures in conversation with artists from all around the world. And the notion of the diaspora is really important because when you think of transnationalism, artists have been on the move since millennia. This is not a 20th century idea. And many of the artists that were formative artists for this collection were artists who had studied abroad, lived abroad, were very curious about other cultures. They had a deep sense of wanting to learn and wanting to impart themselves in a new culture. And what happens in that process is very interesting. And you'll see evidence of that kind of research when you come into the building.
And I'm going to say something, it might be a little controversial, but I think it's important for people like myself who have worked in this field, and I very much identify as a contemporary art curator as much as I am an art historian. And in my start of my career, especially working with all the living artists, absent knowing the art history in depth, you become a little, I want to say, uprooted from understanding the correlation of what we've learned as basic art history and then our arrival at contemporary art as it is today. Something's missing. There's like gaps, blocks that don't match up. How am I seeing, social interventionist projects by artists? How am I seeing, let's say, resistance art? How am I seeing various performative art, body politics, land politics, etc.? So there are missing gaps in that articulation of art history. And in the deep research that the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi has enabled us to do, we've come to really understand, and not just that, but of course there's a lot of places and areas of studies and universities and institutions that have all been unraveling this, that there's been movements from the Bandung, from the Progressives group, from the Casablanca school, that are all associated to socio-political betterment in global South, third world narratives. And when we come to contend with that, you understand how Arte Povera moves to post-minimalism, to etc. And then you start to see that there's a language that contemporary artists then borrow from that, right? There becomes the articulation of where it gets murky and the borrowing becomes so vivid. These histories, these nodes of histories have helped shape contemporary art as we know it today. This is the important thing for us to really come at the arrival of. Yes, the formalistic traditions are very important to Western canon and the development of it, and have contributed immensely for artists in our day. But at the same time, there is a large, vast number of artists we see in institutions, biennials, etc., that owe a lot to, let's say, the global South and so forth. And hence the importance of our institutions to pay attention to these histories, to go back, to look at them, but at the same time, bring them forth in their forcefulness in collection displays to say, alongside, this is how you see it together with, and this is the full picture of contemporary art today. So I think that's how we come to understand it.
And I think that there's also like a power of, the museum being situated within the Gulf, within the region, directly with its neighbors, showcasing, the art histories and narratives from the demographic that is currently present in the UAE, for example. This is something that, the UAE being such a cosmopolitan country with many demographics from all over, and mainly from the global South, to be visiting their, very near art, art histories and even the political histories as well that they've probably experienced or as part of their narrative, they'll be able to come and visit and see and being placed alongside. Yeah. And I think that, there's also this question about representation and how all of these geographies and these histories will be placed within the museum and parallel alongside that. Is that the way that we're trying to, is that the method, to showcase it in such a in this parallel way that is interconnected and showcasing these histories, breaking away from these kind of rigid structures of, not just Arab artists or South Asian artists or women artists, and bringing up questions of representations about indigeneity and authorship, around craft as well. How are we tackling these questions and these ideas within the display and the narrative?
What we really do, I think we believe in the nation, or what it has on the archaeological thinking, to not say that's the one dominant discourse, but really to have the joy to explore how, certain movements are related to crafts, how, their parallels, how their differences, and how through just presenting works next to each other, you suddenly discover something new. And I think the other thing we really believe in is artist-led. I mean, we work so closely with artists, and we believe that the artists are also bringing us the knowledge of knowing how we engage in our community. And I mean, that's the beauty also to me, so living in Abu Dhabi, to see that enormous variety, that there isn't, there so many different DNAs in our audience, which is very unusual. Or wherever I worked before, any German, many English, many American, many Australian. And there you go, and you have like the Arabic, the Hindi, the French, English. So you have this real kind of what is, I think, for me, the ideal context for a museum, because you'll have an audience who brings all this knowledge, so you kind of can learn from them very differently than in any other places. So I feel like London is a good place, yeah, but it's easy with a huge ride to do that. But I think that the methods of inviting artists in to do works with us and for the institution and invite the community in, it's something which we believe in will, create that community before we open.
And I do think it reflects on the ethos of the place of Abu Dhabi itself, right? Like, there is a true sense of openness, right? A desire for a leveling field of openness, of hospitality, of a less, a place where everyone has roots in various ways. And I think it's a place where a lot of people call it home because they feel that deep sense. And I think I feel it's natural for institutions built in that context to start to embody those values. And I think it is an important thing, absent any colonial history too. I think that's a big attribute. It helps. But, and I think it helps set a new articulation for a museum.
And I think also too, what I also experienced is that it helps to not always needing to think in these boxes. I think it's something, we're weird, I'm very trained, to always define, to say this is this is that. And I think the culture of the region is much more to say it's much more fluid. And you don't have to identify everything as something specific. But it's much more this idea that things can come and go, and not everything has to be clearly defined. And I think that allows also the connection and the connection display to be much more open to these relations we want to explore, instead of always saying there has to be one clear definition of one connection. They're saying there can be many connections. So I think how the building allows us to show the connection will really tell that kind of control.
Yeah, I said it earlier in the talk, but I do want to reiterate it. It's a no to essentialism. And, essentialist rhetoric is the downfall of all cultures at large, right? When we go back to saying we're only Arab, or we're only that, or that, this is it would be a scary moment in the 21st century if that's what our museums would embody. And I think allowing for a larger truth-telling about the porousness of how we operate as cultural figures, as people who embody progressive thought and openness, would be the right way for museums to start to shape up. Not to forsake authenticity or heritage or senses of indigeneity and self-respect. That's not the issue. But to do so in an elevated form where you can be inclusive of the other. The other is in you. There's room. And I think that's the it's the beauty that we all aspire to.
Great. Just to add one other perspective. So how did this manifest in the collection? And how do these principles, as you're hearing us discuss a lot of, we think, we feel and we feel and we see, and we have a set of principles that guide us, both intellectually and emotionally. And the collection is not flat. So even in this idea of relation, there are many nuances. There are many deep pockets of scholarship. There are many deep areas of research. But it's in conversation, right? So because the Frank Gehry building is a beautiful building, it's a very interesting building to work in, because Frank Lloyd Wright did that with us in New York. You come in and everything is on view at any given time. Gehry does that in a very different way. And it's not a flattening of the collection, but it's still a kind of flattening of lines or a flattening of languages. There's deep specificity in each one of these choices, because the kind of research that has gone into every single collection object. Some of these works take years to compile, if not decades. And that is really the requiring of a deal of curators and researchers. So hopefully, the evidence is in the building. All of these principles and philosophies that you're hearing us discuss, you will see when you have it.
Sorry, and one thing, because I think, Stephanie, you've always been the champion. Again, you mentioned the artist, and I think the ethos of the Guggenheim has always been the contemporaneous artist and the contemporaneous moment. And I do want to also emphasize how important it is for us to, we're talking about these histories, but it's to arrive at the now, right? It's for us to understand and to live our current moment. It's not just about it's not just about the past, but it's about really being able to present the living moment, right, for people to be able to acknowledge their self-awareness in this current time and and hence in the living moment, we have a deeper sense of appreciation of our time, of these legacies, of these experiences. And I would like you to talk about how, because I know how much you're ushering that contemporaneous, I want to call it energy, and with, subsumed with everything that we're also talking about, because I feel, there's a lot that then speaks to audiences in different ways. Oh, sorry, I hijacked you.
I also look at I'm my first.
On me.
No, I deeply believe that, the way how we learn from artists, or how they kind of bring their discourses and their way of working to an institution, and how we can challenge ourselves in our structures. I mean, that's something which I always loved doing when I was in Berlin, when I had the artists in residence. They were always the people who were in the meetings and saying, why are you doing this? It's not like, and I think we had now the opportunity, because that in our case, everything makes sense, or nothing makes sense, because we're not there yet. So we're kind of building this, and I think to do this with the practice and the really what I do is the grassroots of the artist's intuition and way of researching. I mean, that is something I think where when we invite artists in, they come and make friends, and that's how it works. You just make friends. You kind of start communicate. And I think that's really something where I feel it is the beauty of an institution slowly creating this network, of kind of, the rhizomatic, the way how things are connecting. And I think to me, and I mean, that was my question, is your practitioner who has been very active in the region, but you also worked in different, one of our team members, I mean, I learned a lot from, because it's always just interesting to me to hear when you say, well, this is, I used this magazine. That was one of the magazines I took learn about the artists of my region. It kind of that understanding that there just hasn't been that much when you were learning about the artists from the place you're from, and what an institution like the Guggenheim will really add to, the generations, now the younger generations, of understanding. And I think that's really something I feel is so important for us to also, learn through you, that a lot of the things the institution will do, or if there's a completely different opportunity for people to research, to write, to see the works in the context of an international, context, but at the same time also celebrating what is coming from the region. And so I think it's interesting, I feel, to hear that, how you started to learn about the artists of the region, and where you feel maybe that has changed since you started to curate and work with artists, and where you see that, my lead now was a Guggenheim of Dhabi.
Thank you. Question to me, and I did have questions prepared, just so you know. No, I think I'm taking everything from what you're all saying, which I learned so much from you all about, and kind of learning these approaches of how to create such a decentralized, unhierarchical, very flowing, a very organic sort of way of working. And I think that's something that I really take with me when, I'm thinking about how I see this museum to become in the future. I've been hearing about this museum, opening since 2007. I started working in 2016, and here we are in 2025, so it's really been this kind of moment where I'm waiting, to see how an institution can bring in collaboration, and can bring in and build and support these networks that I've been using my entire practice. Places like, I had mentioned Ibraz was one of the only resources of contemporary art critique and history that I was able to, manage to find online, to really support my research and understand my own history. And I think that is what I would hope for audiences, to come to the museum and find and do, because then I all of a sudden felt such a relatability, strength, joy within, all of these artists and people that I just found so inspiring, and happy and proud that they're from, you know, my near space. So that's something that I really hope that, you know, collaboration, friendship, connections, networks, that this is all that something that the institution will support.
It was the third text for me. It's not the age of the online. It was like the paper magazines of third text. That was the informative, you know, critical debates that were shaping our cultures too, and seen from that perspective. I think the very important, I mean, one thing that for me will always be the important thing, and something I've always been invested in as even from a very young age, having worked on so many institutional building projects, call it my Palestinian side, you know, this is like something I've always aspired to see, the aggregate place, the institution that does not collapse, you know, the place where accumulation of our wealth of knowledge, of the representations of our culture, of the mindset, the collectivity, the positivity in cultural representation all comes together. And to see that in an institution, in a museum, is absent in various places in our world. And it's about time. You know, it was about time. And for me, having been on that project, you know, I've been affiliated from 2009, but I would say it's, you know, it takes time too. You know, institutional building is all of these things. It will take time. It has taken its time. We're arriving at moments of fruition in it, but it holds within it legacies, and the wonderful thing about it is that it will continue to carry legacies, and that's immense.
Okay, I think we're going to come to my last question before we close out. And I would like to let us imagine and think and dream for a bit about where do we see the future, you know, of collecting or exhibition making heading from here, in terms of, you know, the responses that we're seeing now, the demands and the shifts that we're begging to see, really. Where do we see it go from here, and what are your thoughts? Stephanie told me everyone.
I think it's the first time where I feel like, you know, that I don't think beyond like
or in like tunnel vision mode, right?
I also feel that a lot of things that many of our colleagues and practitioners want to do in existing institutions who have existed since centuries. By doing now, like even I'm Abu Dhabi, and really having that journey of going through a lot of the cycles, but having from the beginning this DNA of what we call transactional, transhelping. I mean, it's genie, but I think it's really the seed. And I think, remember when we went to the tape, and it is very specific that we can do it from the start. So we don't need to change. You think a lot of my thinking up to now is always, I want to change an existing structure. Well, but really have with these new is the opportunity to stay a completely different ground. And I think that's something where I think that it becomes much more really realistic. You just say, well, we just need to open the door, and that's already a good set to do that. And then see, you know, if we want to go beyond and say we don't need museums, you know. I mean, I've always been a big fan of saying, you know, there doesn't need to be a building. Museums should be everywhere. It should be a mobile museum. But now I feel like I feel like that's my dream.
And then it'll trash it. And it'll trash it all. No, you too.
I mean, it's hard to say, you know, it's hard to predict what the prophesize. I don't think we will like. I think we were done, but each time we were done, we evolved. Because we learn from our wisdoms. So I think, I mean, I would really hope that the museum is an inclusive place. That's really important, not just for audiences, but also for young people.
And that's a big part of what we've been discussing here thoroughly, is how is the place that's welcoming, that's not daunting, a place where performance and, young families, interaction. I mean, everyone has a voice. No one is uneducated. Everyone has a voice. Everyone has agency. It's a question of opening the doors and letting everyone participate. And that generosity and that democracy is something that I insist on for any museum that's starting in the 21st century.
I think we will, I echo something Stephanie said earlier, which is we will always be anchored on the artist. They will tell us where we will go. But at the same time, being in as an art historian, as someone who is a curator in practice, and I think of myself as an artist too, in articulations of how these things are being shaped up. I think, it's about time to see museum language go beyond just the preciousness of objects